when the life I thought I knew split down the middle. I lay still in the narrow bed at the end of the hall and heard Victoria's whisper slice through the quiet. "We're taking her to the nursing home tomorrow. It's all arranged." The words landed like a cold hand on my throat. I had imagined myself a guest who had overstayed. To them, I was clutter to be hauled away. I slipped on my shoes, took my purse, and felt the night air kiss my face as I stepped through the back door, terrified, furious, and suddenly, fiercely free. My name is Margaret. I am 70 years old, and for 5 years I lived in the house my son Daniel called his, and I pretended was ours. I moved in after my husband died, when grief made every room in my condo echo, and Daniel appeared on my doorstep with damp eyes and promises. "You're my only family," he said. And the lie was convincing, because I wanted it to be true. I sold my condo, packed my careful life into boxes, and crossed his threshold believing kindness returned itself like interest. At first, it seemed to. Daniel brought home flowers and stories. Victoria set 2 places and asked about my day. I ironed shirts, simmered soups, and let usefulness stand in for belonging. Then, little by little, smiles thinned like old fabric. "Margaret, don't you think you're eating a bit too much? Maybe stay in your room when we have guests. The house looks tidier." Daniel did not contradict her. He said the word that became a leash: rest. When dinner was ready, there were 2 plates. When I stood in the doorway, there were 2 chairs. When I washed the dishes, I heard, through the wall, Victoria's low voice. "She's too much of a burden." Daniel's answer trailed after it like a sorry flag. "But she's my mother." "Exactly," Victoria said. "She's your mother, not mine." I wish I could say I confronted them then, that I banged on their door and demanded respect. Instead, I folded my loneliness into smaller squares and slid it to the back of the drawer. I told myself it was a bad spell, that love was cyclical and patience would bluff it back into bloom. What they never asked, and I never offered, was that for 60 years my late husband and I had done with money what we did with marriage. We tended it. We wore modest coats and kept meticulous books. When I sold my condo, I did not spend the proceeds, I invested them. The numbers sat quietly in accounts the way pearls sleep in velvet, unremarkable from the outside, shining, if you lift the lid, on that August night. The lid flew open, the call ended, the house settled, the clock took a long breath between ticks. I counted 3 minutes, then rose, slipped my documents, cash, and phone into my purse, and moved down the hall the way a woman moves through a museum when she has come to say goodbye. At the back door, I listened for the old wooden complaint of the hinge and eased it shut between beats of my heart. The air smelled of jasmine, sprinklers, and relief. I walked for an hour under lamps that made my shadow switch sides, then flagged a cab and said the name of the city's most expensive hotel. If they were going to treat me like a burden, I would let money carry what they had dropped. At 3:00 a.m., the receptionist looked at my sensible shoes, my small purse, and my age as if they were mismatched luggage. My card did the talking. "The presidential suite. For 2 nights," I said, and felt a dangerous calm settle on my bones as the elevator rose. At 6:00 a.m., Daniel called. I watched the screen flash, then darken, then flash again. At 8:00 a.m., Victoria tried. By then, I was on the terrace eating eggs Benedict and smoked salmon, the city waking at my feet. I let their voicemails line up like apologies rehearsed too late. "We're worried. Please answer." "Where are you?" I buttered toast. I breathed. I did not reply. When the plate was clean, I called my bank and asked for what my life looked like in numbers. The figure made even me pause. Then I called Benjamin Carter, the best family lawyer in the city, the man who had once shepherded my husband's will with the gentle authority of a good surgeon. "Margaret," he said, surprise warm as steam. "How are you in need of clarity?" I replied. "And a plan." He told me to come at 4:00 p.m. I booked the hotel spa at noon for a haircut, a manicure, a small resurrection. When the stylist asked if it was a special occasion, I said, "It's the first day of the rest of my life." She laughed. I did not. Benjamin's office sat on the 25th floor, with windows that turned roads into ribbons. He poured coffee and listened without interruption as I described the call. The months of erasure. The door that clicked softly behind me at 2:10 a.m. He took notes as if each word had legal weight. "This is serious," he said at last. "If they intended to place you without consent, we're in the territory of elder abuse. We can file for protection and, if needed, damages." I felt my shoulders square. "What would you do?" I asked. "If you wanted not just safety, but a lesson that sticks." His eyes brightened the way a chess player's do when a board reveals a new line. "We teach them exactly who they underestimated," he said, publicly, legally, and decisively. I left with a stack of folders and the outline of a strategy that felt like stepping into a pair of shoes I had forgotten fit me. In the elevator. My phone vibrated again. I answered. "Mom," Daniel said. "Thank God." "Where are you?" "We've been looking everywhere." His voice wore concern like a borrowed jacket presentable. Not his. "I'm safe," I said. "We should talk in person. Soon. On my terms." He exhaled like a boy who wants instructions more than he wants his mother. "When you'll know," I said, and ended the call before he could find the old word rest and tie it around my throat. The next morning at 9:00 a.m., I let the sweet curtains open like a stage and watched light glide over the city's glass. I ordered Colombian coffee, fresh fruit, and quiet, while the tray warmed the room. I dialed Lauren, the real estate agent who had shown me, years ago, an apartment with a view that made me feel taller just by thinking of it. "Margaret," she said, her voice all bells. "What a lovely surprise. I need a place of my own." I told her, "Not someday, now. Penthouse if possible. Concierge, a terrace that reminds me I still have horizons." There was a beat during which she recalibrated who I was. "Give me until afternoon," she said. "I already have a place in mind." When the call ended, I phoned the hotel salon, booked a manicure, a pedicure, and a cut at 11:30 a.m., and lay back for 10 minutes with my hands around the coffee like a prayer I intended to answer myself. By noon, a young stylist named Katie was combing my hair with respectful concentration. "Special occasion?" she asked. "A promotion," I said. "I've just named myself CEO of my life." She grinned, then grew solemn at my tone, as clipped ends fell like old versions of me. I felt a steadying less a makeover than a return. At 2 p.m., Lauren met me in the lobby with keys, contracts, and the delighted urgency of a woman who loves her work. "If you don't like the first place," she said in the elevator, "we'll see 3 more by dinner." The doors opened at the top floor of a tower that kept its voice down. Inside, the penthouse was air and angles, floor-to-ceiling windows showing a city that looked suddenly negotiable. There was a small hot tub winking on the terrace like a private moon, a kitchen that invited experiments, and a bedroom where silence would feel like choice. 2 years. Furnished. 24-hour concierge, Lauren said. I walked to the window, watched a train slide between buildings, and realized I had not moved toward anything in a very long time. "I'll take it," I said, and signed the lease. 2 years paid in advance. My pen steady as a gavel. At 4:15 p.m., my phone lit with an unfamiliar number. Inspector Marcus Riley, the voice said. Your son filed a missing person report. I stood by the suite window and let calm be audible. Inspector. I am safe. I left voluntarily, and I am of sound mind. Please note that I do not consent to welfare checks initiated by my son or his wife. He cleared his throat. Understood. Ma'am, would you like to provide your current address? No, I said softly. But consider this a courtesy call, so your time isn't wasted. When I hung up, I forwarded the exchange to Benjamin. He replied within minutes. Good. Paper trail. Everything in writing from here on. On the 4th day, I moved. The bellman wheeled a cart piled more with intention than with belongings, in the new kitchen. I set one mug on a shelf and felt the eccentric luxury of having space for a second. The concierge, a woman with an efficient smile, handed me a list of building amenities and a welcome packet with my name embossed. I flipped the cardstock between my fingers and thought how often, in the last 5 years, I had heard my name only as a problem. By 6:00 p.m., the sunset had flushed the room gold. I raised a glass of red wine to the window and christened the air with a promise I will never again be an accessory in my own life. Daniel called at 7:10 p.m., I answered. Mom, he said, the police told us you're all right. We need you to come home. I am home, I said. My home is new? There was silence, the kind that turns a son's face toward his wife for instructions. With what money, he asked at last. A question that exposed the smallness of his map. The kind that accrues when people underestimate you, I said. We should talk. He tried again. Soon, I said, but on my terms, before he could repeat the word that had erased me for years. I ended the call and dialed Benjamin. By 8:00 p.m., I was in his office again, our plan stretching its limbs. We could file for a restraining order, he said, but I have something cleaner. There's a real estate showcase next week at the Grand Meridian. Investors, press. The whole city's appetite for spectacle. Lauren can help us secure the stage. If you're willing, we make your independence undeniable and public. I pictured Victoria's practiced smile unspooling in a chandeliered ballroom. I pictured Daniel's silence growing too heavy for his pocket. Send the invitations, I said, specifically to them. Benjamin's mouth tilted, already in motion. In the days before the event, messages from Daniel and Victoria multiplied. Concern became pleading. Pleading sharpened to warning. This isn't funny, Daniel wrote. Please come back before we have to take more drastic measures. I forwarded each note to Benjamin, who filed them like exhibits in a museum of poor decisions. Meanwhile, the law revealed something exquisite. The house they lived in, Daniel's house, was held, per my husband's will, in a trust that named me as the owner for the rest of my life. Daniel's right was conditional on care and consent, neither of which had been kept. When Benjamin slid the notarized documents across his desk, I felt less vindicated than clarified. Reality had, all along, been on my side. I had only needed to read it. On the morning of the showcase, I dressed in an emerald suit that made my reflection stand up straighter. Lauren met me at 6:30 p.m. beneath the ballroom chandeliers, where waiters aligned champagne like commas and a screen flickered through glossy properties. At 7:30 p.m., Daniel and Victoria arrived, slightly overdressed and already out of place. I watched them scan the room for the person who had flattered them with an invitation. Lauren took the stage to welcome guests, then gestured toward me. A visionary investor, she said, with a story about independence. The applause was warm, curious. I walked to the microphone and let the room settle. "Good evening," I began. "I learned something recently about the price of assumptions." The chandeliers hummed with light as I looked out over the ballroom. Rows of polished faces watched me with curiosity. But my eyes found only two Daniels pale with dawning dread. Victoria's stiff with disbelief. 5 years ago, I said evenly. I sold my home and moved in with my son and his wife. I believed family meant safety. What I did not realize was that my presence would slowly be treated as a burden. A murmur ran through the audience like a draft. People leaned in, sensing that this was not a typical investment pitch. 2 weeks ago, I overheard my daughter-in-law on the phone. I continued. She said, "We're taking her to the nursing home tomorrow. It's all arranged." I let the words linger. Heads turned. Whispers rose. Daniel shifted on his feet as if the carpet burned. "That night," I said, "I walked out of their house with nothing but my purse, and I discovered something they had forgotten, that the woman they planned to discard had resources of her own." Benjamin stepped to the stage, holding a leather portfolio. "Tonight," I said, "I purchased 3 properties from this exhibition: a penthouse, a country home, and a commercial building, $2 million in cash." Gasps fluttered through the room. Champagne glasses froze midway to lips. I saw Daniel's shoulders crumple, as if a weight he hadn't known existed had just been set upon him. Victoria's mouth formed a silent word I had long ago stopped believing impossible. "I share this," I told the audience, "not to boast, but to remind you, never assume you know the full story of someone's life, especially an older person. Independence is not an age. It is a choice." Applause swelled. Polite at first, then sincere, as I stepped down. Investors leaned toward one another, hungry for both gossip and admiration. I walked directly toward Daniel and Victoria. "Hello, son," I said softly, my voice reaching only his ears, though cameras were everywhere. Surprised to see me, he opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. Victoria's hand gripped his arm like an anchor. "Margaret," she stammered. "I don't understand. Since when do you have money?" I met her stare. "Since always. You never asked. You assumed I was poor because it was convenient for you to think so." Daniel's face drained of color. "Mom, if you had told us, we could have what I cut in. Treated me with dignity, or simply plotted more creative ways to take advantage." Guests nearby stopped pretending to study property brochures and simply listened. Some even recording with discreet phones. Benjamin produced the trust documents and handed them to me. I opened them slowly, deliberately. "You've lived in that house for 5 years," I said. "But legally, it belongs to me. Your father left it in trust under my name. You could live there only as long as I allowed. That permission ends now." Daniel's knees buckled slightly as he took the papers. "That can't be true," he whispered. Benjamin's calm voice carried. "The trust is duly registered and notarized. Mrs. Vance is the legal owner." The crowd thickened. The murmurs sharpened. An elegant woman introduced herself as a journalist from the city's financial newspaper. "Would you grant an interview, Mrs. Vance?" she asked. "The public should hear this story." Victoria's cheeks flushed crimson. "This is humiliation," she hissed. "We took care of you for 5 years. We gave you food." "A roof, my roof," I corrected coldly. "My food, bought with my money. And you call that care?" People shook their heads. The tide of opinion visible and irreversible. The following week, my story was everywhere, headlines calling me the millionaire grandmother who outsmarted her family. Interviews piled up. Support messages poured in. But Daniel and Victoria shifted from panic to strategy. Victoria appeared online in tearful videos, insisting she only wanted the best for me. The comments shredded her defense. If it was love, why at 2:00 a.m. in secret? Why didn't you know she had money? Daniel called me daily, his tone veering between pleading and anger. One night, his voicemail trembled. Mom, please, we lost our jobs. Victoria was fired, and I had to resign. We can't pay rent if we're forced out. Please help us. I listened in silence, remembering the countless evenings I had eaten alone while they dined. Help. Now that the tables had turned, the irony tasted sweeter than any wine. Yet another storm was already brewing, and I would soon learn just how far their lies had gone. The storm arrived not from Daniel's phone calls, but from a knock on my penthouse door. It was early evening when Stephen Clark, an investigative journalist, stood in my living room with a folder so thick it looked alive. Mrs. Vance, he began. Your story struck a chord. I dug deeper. What I found is worse than betrayal, it's fraud. He spread the papers across my glass table. For years, Daniel and Victoria have claimed you suffer from dementia. They used it to get tax deductions, elder care subsidies, and personal loans. They even fabricated medical bills in your name. My breath slowed to a dangerous calm. He showed me returns padded with false expenses, receipts for medications I had never touched, even a psychiatrist's report diagnosing me with memory loss. Then he slid over a printout of a blog. The title made bile rise, Living with Margaret, a Devoted Daughter-in-Law's Diary. Entry after entry painted me as a confused, volatile woman. Today, Margaret misplaced her medicine and accused me of hiding it. One read, the doctor says her decline is accelerating. We're exploring nursing homes, sponsors, donation links. Even affiliate ads cluttered the margins. How much, I asked. Stephen's voice hardened. About $15,000 from the blog. Another $8,000 from a crowdfunding campaign to renovate the house for dementia safety. My hands trembled, not from age, but fury. They turned me into a character in their fiction, I said, and profited. Stephen nodded. You have grounds for criminal charges, fraud, defamation, elder abuse, at that moment. Daniel called again. This time I answered on speaker. His voice was ragged. Mom, thank God. Things are bad. People harass us online. Someone egged the house. Please help us. My gaze fell on the blog printouts. Daniel, I said evenly. Do you know about living with Margaret, about the fake tax returns, about the loans taken in my name? Silence bled through the line. I didn't know details. He stammered. Victoria handled that. I almost laughed. So you didn't know your wife was publicly declaring me incompetent while you signed the returns. You didn't know you were stealing in my name. His voice cracked. She said it was legal. She said we were entitled. Mom, we can fix this. No. I cut him off. This doesn't get fixed with excuses. It gets fixed with justice. I hung up and looked at Stephen. When can we file? Within days. Benjamin had drafted lawsuits like a carefully aimed volley fraud. Misappropriation, identity theft, elder abuse. But I wanted more than courtrooms and paperwork. Let the world hear it. I told Stephen, if they lied publicly, we'll reveal the truth publicly. We arranged a live broadcast. Word spread, and by the hour of air, 80,000 people were waiting. I sat in my living room before the camera in a violet dress, hair perfectly set. Good afternoon, I began. My name is Margaret Vance. For 5 years, my son and daughter-in-law have lied about me to profit from my supposed dementia. I held up the blog printouts. This is fiction. I do not suffer from dementia. I manage my finances, my home, my life. The comments surged angry faces, shocked exclamations, support. Then, as if on cue, Daniel called. I answered live. "Mom, stop this broadcast," he begged. "You're destroying us." "Daniel," I said, "there are 80,000 people listening. Do you want to explain why Victoria invented my dementia?" Panic scrambled his words. "It was Victoria's idea, not mine." Gasps flooded the comment stream. Victoria's voice shrieked in the background. "Hang up, don't say another word." I raised my voice. "Victoria, would you like to tell the viewers why you fabricated blog entries about my episodes on dates I was traveling?" "Investing. Living my life," she screamed back. "You abandoned us, we cared for you." "No," I replied, my tone like steel. "You exploited me, and now the truth is public." The line cut. The broadcast soared to 90,000 viewers. The next morning, donations poured in not for Daniel and Victoria, but for me to create a foundation. News outlets clamored for interviews, and within a week, Benjamin filed the lawsuits formally. The law was on my side, but so was something even stronger, a nation's outrage. 6 months later, justice arrived in black ink on the front page of the morning paper. Couple sentenced for fraud against elderly woman. Daniel was handed 2 years in prison. Victoria, as the architect of the scheme, received 3.5. Together, they owed a $50,000 fine and would complete community service in nursing homes when their sentences ended. I read the headline on my terrace, "The city stretching beyond," and let the words rest like a balm. It was not revenge, it was restoration. But the truest satisfaction was not their downfall. It was the life I had built from the ashes. The Margaret Vance Foundation for the Protection of Seniors had already assisted over 200 people. We ran a helpline, offered free legal support, and taught financial literacy to older adults who, like me, had been made to feel invisible. My story had even spurred lawmakers to strengthen protections against elder exploitation. For the first time in decades, I felt my days ripple outward, helping others rise. At 71, I was not just surviving, I was living. I took salsa classes and laughed when my hips protested. I learned to paint, filling canvases with color after years of gray. I traveled, walking cobblestone streets I once only dreamed of. My phone filled with messages from strangers who now felt less alone. One came from a 68-year-old woman in Mexico. "Your story gave me the courage to confront my family. After 2 years of humiliation, I finally stood up for myself. Thank you for showing me I deserve respect." I pressed the screen to my chest, tears softening the edges of the city lights. Even as joy returned, ghosts lingered. Friends asked if I planned to reconcile with Daniel. I thought often about it. I had adopted him as a child. I had once believed my love would always be enough. But reconciliation requires more than blood. It requires truth. Until he could admit what he had done without excuses. Without shifting blame, the door to my heart would remain closed. Empty apologies rebuild nothing. Still, I did not live in bitterness. Each night, I set one place at my terrace table, poured a glass of wine, and spoke to the photo of my late husband. I didn't let them turn me into a victim. I told him, I defended my dignity, and I helped others defend theirs. I know you'd be proud. Some nights I laughed at the absurdity Victoria trying to sell her story to a television company, pitching herself as a tragic heroine undone by internet cruelty. Producers rejected her. Of course, they wanted protagonists who inspired sympathy, not scorn. The irony was delicious, but I let it pass, because in the end, The lesson was simple, and it belonged to more than just me. It is never too late to reclaim your life. Kindness should never mean surrender. Family does not excuse abuse. Age does not erase independence. Sometimes the greatest act of defiance is not revenge at all, but living well. So I dance, I paint, I travel. I answer calls from strangers who find strength in my story, and I remind them, as I remind myself each morning when the city wakes outside my window, dignity is not granted, it is claimed. If my story moved you, please like, share, and subscribe. And leave a comment about where you're watching from. Together, we can remind the world that every voice, no matter how old, still matters.